All right, so we're at time, so I'll get started, and I'm sure some people will join us slowly as we move forward here with this webinar. As I mentioned earlier, this is a webinar on building assessments in virtual campus. So a little bit different than grading assessments. I won't be covering the grading aspect. That'll be another webinar that happens next week, I believe. So if you're more interested in the grading component, look for that on our website. So I'm David McDonald. I'm an educational specialist here at the Teaching and Learning Support Service, and I'll be the facilitator for this session. And I'm joined by my colleague, Adrienne, who will be monitoring the chat for me as I'm presenting my screen and showing you how to do things in Brightspace. If you do have questions as we move forward in the webinar, feel free to post them in that chat. Adrienne will try to respond to you as best as she can. Although there's a lot of you in here, so it might be a bit of a challenge. If we see that it'll be easier to respond to you orally, then Adrienne, you might hear her voice as well. She'll let me know, and I'll take a pause to answer some of the questions as long as they're relevant to the section that we're looking at. Also, I'll aim to try to give 15-20 minutes at the end of the session to answer any additional questions that you might have about building assessments within a virtual campus. So in terms of our agenda for today, oh no, if you haven't signed up to other webinars, you can do so at this website. There's a whole series of them for TA Orientation Week, likely how you were able to register for this one. But if you're curious about the other workshops available, then look for that link. And like I said, there's another one on grading next week that I'm giving. So if you want to come to that, then you can sign up there. Then in terms of this session, the agenda for this session will be to do a quick description of each tool. So I'll explain a little bit about assignments, quizzes, and discussion forums. Then we're going to look at how to create a grade center. Again, very quick look at that just to situate how to build an evaluation framework within Brightspace. And then I'll touch into the different features of the assignment tool, the quiz tool, and the discussion forum tool. And then I'll leave some additional time there for questions. I see that we have some annotations on the screen, so I'm just going to clear some of that and make sure that I disabled it. There we go. So although it might seem a little bit self-evident what these different tools do, I want to take a quick little pause and just explain for those who have never been in Brightspace or have very little experience in Brightspace, the types of assessments that you can create within this environment. So the first of these is the assignment tool. And the assignment tool essentially allows you to, or allows students to submit work. And that work can come in the form of documents, so things like Microsoft Word, PDFs, PowerPoint presentations, or even in the form of multimedia projects. So they could submit images, videos, audio recordings. You can see it essentially kind of like a Dropbox for Brightspace with a grading component associated to it. The assignment tool can also be used for individual or group projects. So students can submit individual work, or as a group, they can submit one document or many documents that represent the group's efforts. And from the professor's perspective, that's interesting because they can provide feedback and a grade to everybody in that group at once instead of multiple students individually. Also, the submissions for assignments can be viewed online or offline. So in particular, when there's a Word document attached, we can download all those documents, correct them, and then re-upload them. Or we can use the annotation tool directly in Brightspace to grade and evaluate and provide feedback on student work. Also, in terms of feedback, the instructor and yourself can provide both written, audio, or video feedback, and also use rubrics to evaluate them. And again, we'll touch on those topics more so in next week's webinar. The next tool, quizzes, there's a few different names that we give it. Within Brightspace, it'll be called quizzes, but you might hear it informally called exams or questionnaire when we talk about it in webinars or in person. So if you hear either one of those terms, quiz, exam, or questionnaire, it typically refers to the same tool. In this case, again, a bit self-evident, but students respond to questions. They can come in a variety of forms, which we'll look at in a moment, but more commonly, multiple choice questions, true-false questions, essays, and short answer. In this case, feedback is automated depending on the type of questions that you select. So if it's something like multiple choice or true or false, where the system can read it automatically, then you can provide that feedback very quickly. And in the cases where it's essay or short answer, then it'll require a manual intervention for somebody to actually grade it and provide comments to that response. There's also a proctoring software integration called Respondus that you might have heard of. This, when used with the consent of the student, will allow you to either shut down everything but the window where the exam is occurring, and also allow you to monitor students via webcam. If you're working with a professor that's kind of on the fence about whether to use this technology or not, I would suggest having them contact us. We can always provide alternative evaluation strategies that might better suit their context. And in the case of this webinar, it's going to go a bit outside of our scope, so I won't be touching on Respondus beyond this quick little note and showing where the button is for it. But know that we do have resources online where you can learn more about that tool, and we've given webinars on this tool as well. And then there's another tool within Brightspace called Survey, which functions exactly like the quiz tool. The only difference is that it is not graded and can have questions be made anonymous. So if your professor, as an example, was looking to solicit some feedback about the course from their students, then they could use the survey tool instead of the quiz tool to do that. So I won't touch on the survey tool, just know that it functions exactly like the quiz tool, but has that added bonus of making responses anonymous if we wanted to do that. And then lastly, the discussion forum tool, as the name suggests, is a place where students can share work and discuss. And in terms of sharing work, we're not limited to just written things. People can upload documents and multimedia projects and so on as well. And it's a space that people can use individually or in groups, more commonly groups. But if the professor wanted to create something like a journal as an example, we could use the discussion forum to do journals with students. And again, another webinar that explains how to do that, but know that the discussion tool would be the way to create a journal. And within the discussion, we can also grade and provide feedback on individual or group contributions. So you can give a mark for a student's post or group posts about a particular topic. And the added benefit here is that peers and colleagues can give feedback to each other through the actual conversation that they're having on the discussion forum. And typically discussion forums are more used in online, blended, and bimodal courses. So if you're fully face-to-face, typically you don't have discussion forums activated. So before I share my screen, I just wanted to cover 3 quick steps, what we'll be doing in Brightspace. And this is my recommendation for when you're creating assessments in Brightspace, the kind of workflow to follow to make sure that you don't miss anything, at least until you're comfortable with all the tools and functionalities. So the first thing I would suggest doing is creating the skeleton of the evaluation framework in the Grade Center, then creating your assessment item, whether that's an assignment, a quiz, or a discussion forum, and then linking that item to the content section of the course or making that item available. So if you go through that process, it just makes your life a little bit easier. It'll make sure that you've done every step that we're covering here today and that you haven't forgotten any elements in there. There are other ways of creating these things, but those shortcuts tend to omit certain features and functionalities. So if you don't know where you're going with them, then you risk missing a particular feature that you need to activate or a text box that you need to insert something in. So keep these 3 steps in mind, and I'll show that as I share my screen here. So I will stop my video as I'm presenting here, just so that we can concentrate on my screen instead of my face. And I'll bring up Brightspace here. So if you've joined us rather for previous webinars, you would have likely started by looking at the basics of Brightspace. So looking at how to create an overview section and creating elements like modules and pages within the table of contents. In our case today, we're going to be looking at the course admin section and begin looking at some of those additional tools that we can add to this content area. Just keep in mind that the content tab is where students tend to access materials and assessments. They don't have access to anything that we do in the course admin section until we place it here in the content area, or unless there's a shortcut in the navigation. So as an example, in the top part here, there's a shortcut for assignments. And again, I'll show that workflow as we move forward here with the webinar. So the first thing we'll do is access the Grade Center, and you have two ways to do that. The first is just by clicking on grades in the horizontal navigation bar, or else you can click on course admin. And I'll just do that so that we can see all the tools available to us in that section. Now, when you enter your course for the first time, it might look a little bit different. Sometimes the default is to organize by name. I prefer to organize it by category, just makes it a bit easier to find different tools within Brightspace. And to find the Grade Center and the assignments and quizzes, we're just going to look for the assessment portion of the course admin section. And then in the second column here, we see grades. So we'll click on that to access the Grade Center. Now, usually on the first page under Enter Grades, you'd have your full list of students. In my case, I have 2 colleagues here in the course, so not very representative of what a typical course would look like, but just know that this is where you would usually find your full class list. And the section that we're interested in is right next to it, and it's called Manage Grades. And this will be where we can set up our evaluation framework for the course. Now, in my case, you'll see that I've already developed mine because it can take a bit of time to fully develop your evaluation framework. So I'll give a quick tour of this area and show you how to build it and the types of tools that you can use within this section. So when you're working with professors, you're usually taking what's written in the course syllabus under evaluations and entering it here so that the Grade Center replicates what the course syllabus is showing. And there's really only 2 elements that we can create within this space under the little button here that says New. You can create items or categories. An item in this case is a term that we use for what's going to be graded. So your assignment, your quiz, your discussion forum. And when we create an item here, we're defining how the Grade Center is going to process that particular assessment within the Grade Center. Categories allow us to assign weights or a percentage of the final grade to all the assessment items listed within it. So as an example here, if I scroll down, most professors will assign participation marks for multiple tasks that students complete throughout the semester. But usually the participation mark is only worth 10 or 15% for all those things that the students do throughout the class. So here I have my participation category, and at the end, you see that it's worth 10% of the final mark. And underneath it, I have all the tasks listed that my students are going to need to complete. When I'm looking at the individual items, there's 2 columns for them. The first is describing the max points or what I'm grading them on. In my case, all the participation is out of 10 points. And then next to that, you have the percentage of that category that the item is worth. So in this case, each one is worth 20% of that 10%. So all these items together need to make up 100% of that category total. And if that sounds a little bit confusing, I understand. But if we make an error, Brightspace is going to identify it for us. So as an example here, if I scroll back to the top, I have 2 little notes that Brightspace has flagged saying that there's some errors. The first of these says that my dissertation category sums to 110% instead of 100%. And if I look down, what that means is if I add all these items within my dissertation category, it doesn't equal 100, it equals 110. So I would need to delete one to make sure that the system can properly add it up. And in my case, I can easily tell which one it is because I created it and it tells me to delete it. Likewise, the system will flag if the overall grade total doesn't add up to 100%. So if you accidentally added an extra 0 to an assignment, it would flag it for you here and telling you that the total for that doesn't add up. So in this case here, it tells me that the final calculated grade sums to 140% instead of 100%. And if I scroll down, I'll see another one here that says delete me, I'm ruining the course total. So again, a bit easier in my case to figure out where that is, but the system will flag that for you if there are some additions that don't quite add up. And then to delete them, you would just click on more actions and delete. Or in your case, if it's more so an error in that you typed the wrong number in, you would just click on your item and select edit. So then to create a category is relatively easy. All you're doing is clicking on that new button and then pressing category. And maybe I'll backtrack here a second. So in most courses, you likely, if you're in a course that only has, for example, 3 different assessments throughout the semester, a midterm, a final, and a project, and all those things are the only things that students are being graded on, you're likely not going to be using categories. You're probably only going to create 3 items, and the weight will be 50%, 25%, and 25%. However, if you're in a course where there's multiple assessments, so some high stakes and some low stakes assessments, things like participations, practice quizzes, or quizzes that are worth 5% to see if they've done a reading, if they have a midterm, a project, or a project with multiple parts to it, this is where you'll be using categories to help define what the weight of each item is and to just make it a bit clearer within the grade center. So to create a category afterwards, just pressing on that new button, then selecting category. You'll give it a name. The short name is really, I mean, the students can see it. It's to make it so that it's a bit easier to read in the grade center, though most of the time the name that we give up top here is rather short, so you probably don't need to give it a short name. You can also add a description if you feel like you need to. So for example, what that evaluation means and what it does. If you do add a description and you want students to see it though, you'll have to make sure to activate it. In my case, to be honest, I rarely use the description here to explain what the evaluation does. I would prefer to do that in the content area where students are more likely to see it. Then afterwards, you'll add the weight of that category. So like in the case of the participation, it's what the final calculated total for all the items within that category will be worth. So if it was participation, I might leave it at 10, or if it was a final exam, I might say, it's worth 50%. And the rest of the options, the default ones, are usually the ones that you're going to use, so you can leave them as is. But in terms of distribution, you have 2 that you might play around with. The first being to manually assign weight to the items within the category. You'll use this if you have different percentages for the items that you're putting within the category. So as an example, for that dissertation category that I had created, I had multiple assessment tasks within that. One to create a thesis, let's say that was worth 10%. The other to create a bibliography, maybe worth 20%. And then the draft or the final paper worth 70%. So I would be assigning all those different weights manually and making sure that they sum up to 100%. The other option that you have that you might use is to distribute the weight evenly across all items. So this is helpful in the case where all the items within the category are going to be worth the same. So as an example, participation marks, if every time students attend class, they get a point, as an example, then the system here will automatically assign any item that we create within that category the correct percentage. So we don't even have to think about it. The system will do it for us. And then once we're happy with all the information that we have here, we'll just press on save and close. In my case, I'll press on cancel since I already have all my items and categories. And then you would see it appear here in your list. To edit, again, you would just press on that downward arrow and select edit, and you can modify things after the fact if you need to. Then to create items, it's going to be the same process, clicking that new button and then selecting item. In this case, you'll likely be pressing numeric as the type of grade item. This is just this just represents how the assessment task will be graded. So usually by points. The other ones tend not to be used, and in fact, I think most of them aren't really relevant to our context here at the university. So you'd just be pressing on numeric when you're creating an item. Then you're going to do the same thing as with the category. You're going to give your item a name. In my case, I typically recommend to name the assessment item based off the week, or to give it a title that's going to resonate with students, that they'll be able to tell from the name what it is. You can also give it a short name if it's a particularly long item. Then in the category, this is where you can associate a particular item with the category that you've given, especially if it's something that needs to be weighted differently. So as an example, if this was a participation mark, then I might add it to my participation category. Then you would give it the amount of points. So what the assignment is out of, whether it's 1, 5, 10, or what have you. And then the weight of that particular item with regards to the category total. And then the rest of the options, once again, are the default ones, are likely going to be the ones that you need. If you have particular needs that aren't addressed within the webinar and that you're curious about, you can ask me at the end or in the chat, and I'm happy to answer those. But in general, this is what you would use in terms of the options. And again, I'll press cancel here so that I don't ruin my category totals and all those things. The last thing I want to show here before we move on to assignments and quizzes is this association column. So right now, all the items are blank, meaning there's no assessment tool linked with the grade items. So this means if I had an assignment created or a quiz created, the results would not go to the grade center. So part of our job now is to create the assessment task and to link it to the grade center. And as we create these tools in this webinar, I'll show what happens when we create that link from the other view. So I'll just duplicate my tab here, and then I'll go back to course admin, and we'll head over to the assignment tool. Before I do that, I just want to check in with Adrian. Are there any questions right now about the grade center that could do with a verbal response?
Hey, yeah, good timing. So a question just came up asking, can you write your examples, for example, in the name box? So to me, that's not clear.
I'm not sure either. If it's a question about like whether you can have the examples that I'm providing here today, we can definitely chat about if that's a possibility. I'm happy to share anything that I have there with people who are interested. In terms of other examples, I'm not sure what that could reference. So if you want to clarify it in the chat, we could always
yeah, and maybe at the end too, we can unmic ourselves at the end of the session if there's time and answer that.
Yeah.
And then one more, what's the difference between point and weight in the items part? So
a point is just going to be what you're writing on that paper. So for example, if I had a quiz that was worth, just because the quiz had 65 questions, I made it out of 65 points to make it easy for students to understand how much they had on that particular quiz. So that's what points is. It's what you're giving to a particular assessment task. And the weight of that assessment is going to be what it's worth in the final calculated grade. So I might have a quiz that has 65 questions, but is only worth 5% of the total for the grade, for the overall course. So that weight column defines that particularity. So I could have my quiz worth 5 points, 100 points, 23 points, doesn't really matter. The weight or what it's worth in the grand scheme of the course, the percentage is what's more important typically. Now, most professors will make your life easy in that the points that are given to the assignments will also be equivalent to the percentage that they're worth within the course. So most of the time, and the example that I was giving before was maybe a bit more elaborate, but most of the time, if a professor has a midterm as an example, the midterm might be 50 questions and it'll be worth 50% of the total course grade. So it just makes transcribing that or calculating that a little bit easier. Though it's not needed, you could really make that point whatever you want as long as you do the percentage right afterwards. Were there any other questions?
There was. We have a question asking about wanting to have admin access to the Brightspace demo so that they could facilitate their learning.
Unfortunately, we can't give you admin access, but I can see with Nancy if I can send like a zip version of the course so that you could upload it within your own demo space. You'd see all the examples that we have here today, and you could put them in your own demo space instead of having access to our demo space. So I'll write a note of that, and I'll get Nancy or our group to update the email if that's possible.
Great.
So with that, we're going to go look at creating an assignment now. So again, the process that I went through is I clicked on course admin. You could go to it quicker just by clicking assignments up here, but I'm doing the long way just to get into that habit of seeing all those different administrative tools. So clicking on course admin, going down to assessments and clicking on the assignments tool there. For assignments, we can also create categories, but these are to help us stay organized. They're not linked at all with the categories that we might have created in the Grade Center. So the same name, but aren't related at all. If you have less than, I don't know, 10 assignments, I'd say creating categories probably isn't needed. It's relatively easy to find them just based off the name. Just make sure that you name them in a way that identifies the particular task or week that the students are meant to be completing them in. So give them names that will resonate with your students. So instead of creating a category, we're just going to go and click on new assignment to create a submission folder. Now for the name, I'm just going to try to be consistent here, and I'll take a name from an item that I've already created. Probably good practice as well if you want to make sure that your Grade Center items are named the same things as your assignment. Technically, they don't have to be. You could name them something different. It'd just be a bit confusing for the students if that was the case. So I would suggest keeping to the same naming conventions that you've already put in place for the Grade Center. Below the name is where you can write in your instructions. So this is where you could type things like what they need to do, criteria for the assignment, deadlines, whatever the case may be. Below that, you can attach files relevant to the assignment. So I don't know, fillable documents, additional instructions, problem sets, case studies, whatever the case may be. You can also record audio or record a video. In this case, for example, if the professor or yourself wanted to make the online environment maybe a bit more personable, you could create a video or audio of the instructions here that's attached to the assignment. Just keep in mind though, for accessibility reasons, if you do create a video or an audio, you should be placing a transcript of what you're saying in the instructions as well, or as an attachment. But yeah, there is that option if you want to record, or if you want to record audio or a video. Below that, we can identify if the assignment is going to be graded individually or by group. You'll have to create the group first. So using the group tool up top here, if that's something that you want to select. In my case, I went ahead and created a group in advance so that I could show the feature. But I'll bring it back to an individual assignment, so that tends to be a bit more common. Then for submission type, we're going to keep it to the default file submission, which means that students can upload any sort of file as part of their assignment, whether that's a video, image, or document. The other options within that kind of, I mean, the file submission kind of takes into consideration all these other things. So that's why I'm telling you to just use the default. If you had a particular need, for example, where you wanted to create an assignment because you were doing oral presentations in class and wanted to have it as a tool, you could select an option like observed in person. But for most purposes, the file submission is gonna meet our needs. Below that, where it says files allowed per submission, this will define how many files a student can upload as part of their assignment. So if they're required to attach more than one document, you'll need to select unlimited. But if you only want one, then you can select one file per submission. Again, here the default is likely what you'll be asked to select. Then below that, where it says submissions, here you have the option of deciding how many submissions students are allowed. You can keep it open with all submissions are kept. You can make it so only the most recent submission is kept, or to only allow one submission. I would advise against selecting only one submission is allowed, because if there's any technical issues or the wrong files uploaded, the professor would then have to go in, you or the professor would have to go in, delete the file that the student uploaded, and then give them special access to submit their work. So it's a bit more cumbersome to select this option. And I can guarantee in large classes that there's likely going to be a couple issues with people submitting if you select that option. So keeping all submissions doesn't really do any harm, or keeping only the most recent submission even better if you don't want to be if you don't want to have to sift through all the different ones to find the one to grade. Below that, you have notification email. You should leave this blank. Essentially what this does is it'll send an email to whatever email address is there anytime somebody completes the assignment. So it's a kind of a warning or an indicator that a student has completed their work. So if you had 200 student submissions, you'd get 200 emails anytime somebody submits or resubmits their assignment. So probably not something that you or your professor are interested in receiving. Then under the evaluation and feedback area, here's where we're gonna write the total points for the assignment. Again, I try to stay consistent with what I've already written in my grade center. So in my case, I put that it would be 10 points. So I'll replicate that here. And then this is where we would link it with the grade center. So I would find week 2 submission of thesis question to link it with the grade center. So now what happens is when there's a grade associated and feedback provided with the assignment, it will appear in the grade center as well and be calculated in the final grade for the student and linked with that weight that we put within the item. Below that, again, goes beyond the scope of this webinar, but you could create and add a rubric here. This is especially interesting if you have larger classrooms. It just makes grading a little bit easier to have a rubric, or if you're working with multiple TAs, then this is a nice option to make sure that everybody is grading them consistently and in a similar way. We have resources on how to create that online, so I'll skip over that, but if there are questions at the end, I'm happy to answer them. And the last option on this page, the annotation tools, by default, these will be selected. Just make sure that you didn't accidentally deselect it. And what this allows you to do is to annotate any documents or media that's uploaded to Brightspace directly in Brightspace. So if I want to, for example, write comments on the file that they submitted, this tool would allow me to do that. Next, we're just going to scroll back up and click on the restrictions tab. Here is where we'll have the option to hide the assignment from users, and we'll want that on until we finalize the assignment or when we're ready to release it. If we uncheck this box, it'll be viewable from the assignments tab and eventually in the content tab when we put it in place. You can also set an availability, which would allow students to submit their assignments within the date range that we provide. So in this case, if you were to unhide it from users and set an availability, they would only be able to contribute their assignment or submit their assignment within that time frame, although they would still be able to see the name of the assignment, which typically isn't an issue for courses. So yeah, talk to your professors, see which one they prefer. Often assignment instructions are provided in advance, so it's not problematic to put it in availability instead of hiding it and then unhiding it when it's the exact date. But worthwhile to have that conversation just to make sure that you know what your instructor wants. The other option that you have is to include a due date. So the due date will stamp late submissions so that the professor or yourself can then decide if it's penalized or not. So the due date here, you would set when the max deadline is for when they can submit a work. So let's say it's tomorrow by 9 a.m. If I don't receive a submission by then I want that assignment to be flagged, and then I'll deduct 5 points or what have you for that. It can be useful as well if you don't have an end date for the assignment. So let's say you want to keep the assignment available at all times for the rest of the semester. By putting in a deadline, you would still accept late submissions, but you would be able to easily tell which ones are late. Whereas if you put an end date, let's say I put an end date of Thursday the 2nd, and I put it at, I don't know, 2:30 p.m., that means that the assignment disappears from view at that time. So it would still flag late submissions until 9 a.m., then from then until 2:30, and then after 2:30, the assignment would be hidden from view from students. Finally, you can add special access. So for students with accommodation requests. And you can use this to give more flexible deadlines or also to limit the assignment submission to only those mentioned in the special access. So for example, in the case of a deferred assignment. And I'll show more about how to use this feature in the quiz tool since they function in a similar way and they tend to be used more often in the quiz tool. So once I'm done with my assignment and all the features here, I'll press on Save and Close. Then I'll see a little icon here telling me that there's been a link with the Grade Center. So if I go back to my previous tab and I refresh it, now we'll see that week 2 in the association column, it tells me that there is a assignment tool linked with that. So everything worked out well. And right now it's available to students based off the date that I set, which I forget exactly now what it was, but I think it was September 1st. So if students clicked on that assignment tab, they would see it here like you see it now. But an extra step that I would recommend doing is putting it in the content tab as well. So depending on how you and your instructor have decided to organize the course, you might have things like modules or modules named by week, so week 1, week 2, week 3, etc. You might have created a module for assignments or exams. But placing it somewhere that students can easily access it from the most common area that they'll be using. In my case, I created a little assignment folder here. And to add the assignment, all I would do is click on the middle gray button that says Add Activity. Then I would click on the first item, Assignment, and I would select the one that I just created. And now I get the information. It starts August 25th, so not September 1st. August 25th at 2:05 p.m. and the deadline is September 2nd. Also, you might have remember from the basics webinar, if you click on your name and go into student view, you'll see exactly what they see here in terms of the assignment. So if I clicked on that, I would be able to see the title of the assignment, but I wouldn't be able to click on it or submit anything until the start date. I'll click on course admin to prepare myself to show quizzes. But before I do that, I'll just check in with Adrian, see if there's any questions about the assignment tool.
Hello. So I think that I managed to answer the questions concerning the assignment tool. What does the due date represent? That question just came in.
Yeah, so the due date is just the deadline for the assignment. So by creating a due date, we're asking Brightspace to flag any assignments that are submitted afterwards. So if we include a deadline or a due date, any assignments that are submitted after that will have a little stamp on them. It'll show in red, and then the professor can choose how they decide to grade that assignment. So some classes have penalties for lateness, so it would give a stamp of when that was submitted. So whether it's a day late, 5 days late, 10 days late, and then you or the professor could then apply a penalty, for example, 5% off for every day late. It's really just a mechanism in place to allow you to see that more easily.
Thanks, David. One more just came in here. I didn't get why we add the activity on the last step. Wasn't the assignment already linked in the grade center in an earlier step?
So the association to the grade center, I think there's, I might be misunderstanding, but it seems like two questions. The first that I think is being asked is why create that link. When we create an item within the grade center, it's not linked with any assessment tool, which I understand is maybe a little frustrating. Why are we having to create it twice? That's just how the system functions. We're creating an element within the grade center first and describing how the grade center should process that item. And then we're actually creating the tool itself afterwards and then linking the two. So maybe a bit confusing, but once you create the assignment and you go into those options, you'll have to, under the evaluation section here, link it with a grade item so that it goes to the grade center. If you don't link it with the grade center, then it won't be calculated in that final calculated sum of the course. It'll just be this separate item that's not graded. Or sorry, not, it can still be graded, but it just won't be counted as part of the grade center. And then the other question that you might have been asking is why add it to the content section? When you create an assignment by default, since we have that assignments tab, it is viewable to students as long as they click on the assignments tab. I was just mentioning that it's also worthwhile to put in the content area because it tends to be where students interact with the course the most. So essentially you're creating a shortcut or an additional view into the assignment by clicking add activity and assignments. So now students can access it from the table of contents, or they can access it from the horizontal navigation bar up top. So we're building in redundancies there just to make sure that it's easily accessible for students and also kind of limiting the amount of questions that we might get about where to find certain items. Oh, no, I want to stay there for that. And were there any other questions, Adrian?
No, I think that was really clear what you answered there. Sorry, one just popped up here, but I haven't read it. How do you tell if multiple group members submit different files for the same assignment? So for example, group is disorganized and some members are worried about late submission.
Yeah, it's a good question. So when you label a assignment as a group submission, it'll, the view that you see will be every student together. So if I submit a document and then Adrian submits a document, you would see both of our submissions and the date and time that it was submitted, and only for that group. So you'd have sort of like a little folder there that shows all of that. I know my verbal description probably isn't painting a accurate photo of what that might look like. Just know that in the future webinar on that, we will show that perspective. So yeah, just to let you know, next week when we talk about grading, we'll look at that. And in terms of your question now, there is a way to look at them and to decipher who submitted what and when, and it's organized by group. So it does make things a bit easier for the professor to see when it was submitted and by who. So it shouldn't be an issue, I guess, is my takeaway here. With that, I'll skip over now to the quizzes. I'm conscientious of the time here. So with quizzes, a bit of a bigger tool. You see at the top, you have a few more options: question library, statistics, lockdown browser. Starting from the back here, the lockdown browser is what you would click on to activate Respondus on individual quizzes. Again, I won't show that today because it goes beyond the scope of the webinar, but we do have resources on that. The next tab over statistics, you likely won't be using it, but it gives data like class averages and question statistics for the quizzes that we've created. Then we have another one called question library. And question library is what you would click to create a library, or also known as a question pool or a question bank, that you could import into a quiz. So looking at it quickly, what you would do is press on new and create a new section, and then you would enter new questions into that section. Since the process of creating questions is the same as the actual quiz, I'll show that in a moment. But more importantly, what you need to know is that a question library allows us to create a series of questions and to distribute a certain number of them randomly to students. So for example, I can make a library of 50 questions on a particular topic and choose to select 25 randomly from that library so that each student gets a slightly different quiz. And then that way, it might reduce things like cheating, and could be useful for other things like practice quizzes, or just to provide a variety of questions. In creating question libraries too, it acts as a nice bank. You can transfer them to other courses as well. So it's a nice kind of reserve there to be able to reuse later on. And students don't see this view at all. So when you're creating in here, until you've actually linked it to a quiz, it's outside the view of students. I'll just press done editing. Yeah, so the main tool you'll be using from the quiz section is that blue button where it says new quiz. And I forgot to mention, but like the assignment tool, you also have an ability to create categories to help organize. But again, those categories aren't linked with the grade center. So there's no connection between the two here. So to create a quiz, once again, I'm going to just make sure that I'm keeping to the same naming convention of the quiz that I've already created. So I'll call this one week 2 reading quiz. The category would be, again, the category that I created within the tool, not the grade center. So I'm going to be ignoring that. Under quiz questions, I have the button to add or edit questions. I'm going to skip over this for now, just to show you the other features, and then we'll go back to it to showcase how to actually create multiple choice, true, false, etc. Underneath that, you have the description. This is where you can write any instructions that you have for students. So what they need to complete the quiz, information on how to prepare, how much time they have to complete it, the type of questions that they might be asked to answer, or the content that will be covered. All that can go here. Just keep in mind that by default, it's off. So if you want students to see it, you'll have to toggle it to on. Then below that, the default options for page header and footer, you likely won't be using a page header and footer, so you can ignore that. And you can move on to optional advanced properties. So if you have a quiz or a final exam where the instructor wants to give hints, you could activate that here. And I'll show you how to actually add the hints once we get to the question creation process. You can also disable right click, though we don't recommend it. Disabling a right click can cause problems for students with screen readers. So yeah, don't suggest enabling that, but what it would do is prevent students from opening this little dialog box here and doing things like casting or printing or what have you. And then the last option, you can also choose to disable email, instant messages, and alerts. Though keep in mind that these emails, instant messages, and alerts are only being disabled within Brightspace. So it's the Brightspace email, instant messages, and alerts, not things external to Brightspace. So no harm in activating it. You're probably not using those options within Brightspace anyways. And then the notification email, much like the assignments, I advise not writing your email or the professor's email in there unless you want to get a notification for every submission that you receive. So again, if you have 200, 300 students completing a quiz, you're going to get 200 to 300 emails telling you that they've completed their quiz. Next, we'll scroll back up and we're going to go to the restrictions tab. And here, once again, we have the option to hide or unhide from users. And this will make it visible to students once we place it in the content section. Then I'll skip over the due date for now and just explain availability. The start date and end date in this case will give you a range for when the quiz is visible and can be accessed by students. So it provides them a window for when they can start the quiz. So as an example here, if I click on start date and I'll just make it a nice easy number, let's say 1 a.m., although that's maybe not realistic. And then I'll go to the 25th here and say 2:30. So let's say my quiz starts at 1 a.m. Or sorry, I make the availability window from 1 a.m. to 2:30 a.m. This means that students have an hour and a half to access and begin the quiz. So that doesn't include the duration of the quiz itself. It's just when they can start it. So if a quiz lasts 60 minutes, they'll have 60 minutes from the time that they started the quiz. So to explain this a little bit further, typically in midterm or finals, the range that we provide here won't be this long. It'll be a lot shorter, like 10, 15 minutes. So I might make it from, let me just change it here to make it more realistic, 1 p.m. to 1:10 p.m. There you go. So in this case, students would have 10 minutes to access the quiz. And then after that, they would have the full duration of the quiz that we'll set in a later option. So if my quiz lasts 60 minutes, they have from 1 p.m. to 1:10 p.m. to access it. And once they begin it, they'll have 60 minutes to complete it. Next, the due date allows you to identify students who don't complete the quiz within the allotted time. So it doesn't prevent students from accessing the quiz. It just marks submissions that took longer than the specified time. So for example, if I go back and make that end date 2 p.m., so they have an hour window to access it, I might make my due date August 25th, so everything's August 25th. I might make a due date of 2 p.m. And what this will allow me to do is see anyone who submits late or not within the time frame given. So right now they have a window of 1 hour to access the quiz, but let's say my quiz is only 60 minutes. Anybody who doesn't complete it by 2 p.m., let's say because they accessed the quiz at 1:59 and they were late in accessing the quiz, it would flag their submission as late once 2 p.m. hits. So the reasons why you would do this. The reason why you would do this is to avoid troubleshooting student errors due to a short availability window. So if I make the availability from 1 to 1:10 p.m., it's only 10 minutes for students to access it. So if something goes wrong, let's say they can't connect to the internet, they clicked on the wrong spot, the professor and yourself would have to add them and give them special access for them to be able to enter the quiz after that availability window closes. So by giving a longer availability window, let's say an hour long, it kind of avoids maybe any technical issues that might arise from bad internet connections and what have you. But it also allows you to identify students who might have taken longer to complete the quiz. So it just stamps submissions that maybe took longer than 60 minutes. And then you can go through those submissions manually to see when they started it and when they ended it to make sure that they did it within the time frame indicated. If you are unsure about this or need some guidance about which option to use, not uncommon, I would just say to contact our service for some initial guidance there, some additional guidance rather, and we're happy to kind of help navigate what would be the best choice for your particular context. Also, depending on what you do select, I would also advise in the instructions to specify what the variables here are, what functionality you've put in place, so that students are aware of the restrictions. I'll move down. I'm sure there's probably questions around that. There usually are, but down below in the timing section. So the rest of these you're not really going to be playing with. They're either advanced features or features that aren't commonly used. But the other important part here is the timing. So the timing section is where you'll specify the duration of the exam. So you can make it a recommended time limit. For example, if it's a practice quiz, you might tell them that they should be able to complete it in 60 minutes, but if they take 5 days to complete it, doesn't matter. If it's a midterm, you're likely going to be putting enforced time limit. So in this case, let's say my exam is 60 minutes long. I'll indicate that here. So they only have 1 hour to complete the quiz. And at the end of the time limit, the grace period will take effect. So students will receive a prompt to save their work by the end of the grace period, and then the outcome that we select below here will take effect. So the outcomes are that after the grace period, they can continue working on the exam, that they are prevented from making any further changes, or to allow students to continue working but automatically give them a 0. Typically, the one that's most commonly used is the middle one. So the way that you can look at this is you're really giving students 65 minutes to complete, but after 60 minutes, it tells them, gives them a little countdown, tells them that they're past time, they need to submit, and once that grace period ends, they can't do anything other than submit. If you or your instructor find that a little bit too flexible, you could also just make it 55 minutes here with a grace period of 5 minutes, so that the total exam is 60 minutes. And then after that grace period, again, the student won't be able to make any further changes to their exam other than submitting. From the student's perspective, once they hit that kind of 5-minute mark, there'll be a timer at the top that tells them that they're out of time. And next we have the special access. And just remember that the special access in this case is the same one as in the assignment tool. So to add special access, this is typically for accommodation requests. And in this case, your professor would need to tell you if there are any. As far as I know, TAs don't get those requests directly from SAS. So your professor would let you know if there's any special access that you need to give to students. A typical example of that would be a student who requires 33% additional time to complete an exam or a quiz. So there's 2 types of special access that we can give. We can, 1, allow selected users special access to the quiz, or 2, allow only users with special access to see this quiz. You might use the second one in the case where there's a deferred exam. So you would need to create a completely separate quiz, and that student would complete it on a completely separate date. So this would allow you to make it so that only they can see that quiz and nobody else in the course but the students indicated could see it. More commonly, in the case of that 33% additional time, we're selecting that first option. So allow selected users special access to this quiz. And in that case, once I select it, I click on Add Users Special Access. And then I can change things like the due date and the availability window. Again, typically not something that's being changed for accommodations. It'll be more so the timing. So in this case, the enforced time limit, I might change that now to 75 minutes or whatever 33% additional time is. I don't know off the top of my head. But this would be where you do that, and then you could select the users where that special access applies. In my case, I only have 2, but let's say I want to give both of them that special access. I would select their names and then click Add Special Access. And I would get a summary of that down below. So their names, now their new time limit, and as well as the availability window and so on. If I want to edit or delete it, I just press on this little pencil to edit and the little X to delete it. A couple more tabs, and I'll ask for questions in a minute here after I show the assessment and the submission views. So the next tab is the assessment tab, and here's where you can define how the quiz is going to be graded. So the first option allows anything that can be graded automatically to be graded automatically and gives the grade to the students immediately after they submit it. So this is usually selected for practice quizzes or comprehension checks, but not for midterms and finals. So if somebody was to, let's say, complete it really quickly, they would get to see their score before other students finish their exam. So that's why you wouldn't select this for a midterm or a final, but why you might select it for a practice quiz or a low-stake assessments where it might not matter as much. So let's say in this case, I'm developing a midterm, that I'm going to deselect that. And rather, I'm going to go to the grade item, and I'm going to link it to the grade item that I've already selected. So now the grades will go to my grade center. And I'll click on the automatic export to grades. So sorry, you need to click on this if you want the grades to automatically be put to the grade center. If you selected this but didn't select allow attempt to be graded immediately upon completion, what will happen is the system will require you to go and publish the grades. So students won't be able to see anything until you've published it and provided feedback on the quiz. And again, we'll be talking about grading and that functionality in next week's course. This is more so just to indicate what you would need to select so that you can grade effectively later on. So if it's a practice quiz, you can make the grades available right away. If it's a midterm or a final, you'll likely deselect this and just put auto export to grades and link into the grade item. Lastly, you also have the option to add different attempts. Again, more so relevant when it's a practice quiz. You could let them have unlimited attempts or 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then you could also decide which attempt you choose for the grade. If it's a midterm or a final, it's going to stick to 1 and the highest attempt. So you'll just leave it at its default settings. Then the last thing here that I want to look at before showing how to add quiz questions is the submission view page. So from the submission view page, we can control the type of feedback students receive following a quiz. So for example, we can show them the questions, the responses, and the feedback we wrote for particular questions. So I would click on add additional view, and I might say, let's say, feedback. You can type a message here as well, and then you can select the date where that feedback will apply. So if my quiz was on the 25th and I want to give myself a couple of days to, let's say, examine the questions and publish them, I might give it a week, and then the feedback would be published to everybody a week after the case. And then I can decide what's shown. So I can show the questions that they answered and their answers. I could just show what they answered and the questions, a whole range of available views here for you to explore. And once we're happy with that, we just press on save, and then we'll see that we have that extra or that feedback view there. So this is just a way to automate the process. It's not something that you need to do in advance if it's not something that interests you. You can also just choose to publish the results manually and then let go of this section. So we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna power through and go and show you how to create quiz questions. But I recognize, I see the little chat bubble with comments there, so I'll make sure that we can stay a bit longer to answer any questions that I haven't been able to answer through the webinar. So despite everything we've done so far, we haven't actually put any quiz questions in our quiz. To do that, we'll return to the Properties tab and click on Add Edit Questions. From this view, we can press on this little Add button, and you see that you have the option to add a new question, add a section, or add a question pool. Confusingly, if you click on Add a Question Pool, this is where you'll be able to select questions from the question library. So a question pool is a question library. So again, this is the case where if you created 50 questions in advance, you could choose to randomly select 25 out of that 50 and randomly distribute it to students within your class. A section in this case is something a bit different. It would allow you to group questions together. So for example, I might group all my true and false questions together so that students would complete them one after the other. I might do another section for all my multiple choice questions, or I might organize them by topics or themes. So for example, a section for all the questions on chapter 1 and a section for all the questions on chapter 2. And then the one that you'll be using most often is this button here, Create New Question. So we have a couple different common formats, true, false, multiple choice, multi-select, which would be if there's more than one right answer. Down below we have fill in the blanks, matching, ordering, arithmetic, and significant figures. The only ones that are maybe a little bit confusing are written response and short answer. So short answer here means a one word or one phrase answer that can be graded automatically. So very similar to kind of a fill in the blank, but the options aren't displayed in advance. So if I had a question, what's the capital of Canada? The students would then need to type in Ottawa, and the system could grade that automatically. If we're looking for a short answer or essay style question, we'll be selecting written response. So because all these work very similar and we're running short on time, I'll show you how to create a multiple choice question and all the features available there. But just keep in mind that the features of these different questions are more or less the same. So you're not missing anything out here by us not covering all the other question types. So when you're on a question, you have a few options. You can change the question type if you made a mistake. You would type your question text. You also have the option here in the text editor to make things bold, italic, underline. You could add images and videos as well if you need to, and formulas as well if you're, for example, teaching a class in the sciences that might need one. Then afterwards, you'll want to select the answer. So you'll want to type in, oh, for some reason here it did custom weight. So by default, it should look like this, not what I had before. You'll want to select which one's the right answer and type in your answer choices. So I'll put Ottawa, let's say Toronto. So you would select the right answer here, and you also have the choice to add more choices if you want, or to delete them pressing the X. If there's a particular order that you want them in, you can also use those little dots on the side to reorder them. And you see on the side here that you have a preview of that. Below that, you have the option to randomize answers for each student. So in this case, by selecting that, A, B, C, and D will be different for every student. So in this case, Ottawa is A, but for another student, Ottawa might be C. And this just helps prevent cheating and students communicating what the right answer might be. You can also change the look of things. So instead of A, B, C, D, putting 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can give the question a point. So you can make it out of 5, out of 1, whatever the case is. And in the options that you have here at the top, you can choose to add feedback. So you can add feedback on individual answers. So I don't know, good job. This is why that answer is correct, or this answer is not correct because yada yada yada. Or you can choose to add general feedback for the whole course. So the answer is Ottawa. If you got anything else, it's wrong because blah 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 blah. And in this option menu, it's also where you could add hints if you needed to. Starts with an O, or add custom weights. A short description you'll never use, so I won't bother. But custom weights, you might give partial answers to certain responses. So let's say, I don't know, Montreal was considered as a capital. Maybe you'd give it partial marks. And then once you're done, you can press save, or if you're creating multiple questions in the same format, you might click save and new, in which case it would create another multiple choice question, so you don't have to go back. Or if you're using images and things like that, or graphs, and you're using them again and again in the same question, you can press save and copy, and it'll copy the exact same format for you so that you don't have to re-upload the image. So a little shortcut there. And once you're done, you go back to your quiz, and we have a few more features that appear now. So under quiz questions, you now see that it can change how many questions appear per page. By default, students will see 1 question per page, but you can change that number. For example, make it 5 questions per page. In terms of navigation, you can prevent students from moving backwards through pages, although I don't recommend doing that. If you think of it like an in-person exam, students would be able to go back and forth and modify their answers as needed, though it is an option if it's something that yourself and the instructor wants to do. So this wouldn't allow students to go back and revisit a question that they've already answered on a separate page. And then lastly, you also have the option to shuffle the questions at the quiz level. And what this would do is it would randomize which questions students see. So in this case, one student would see what's the capital of Canada as the first question. Another student might see another question first. And when you're done with that, you'll click on Save and Close. Once again, here we see that I have a little icon that tells me it's been linked to the Grade Center. So if I refresh that, I see now under week 2 that it's been linked properly, which means that the grade item has a corresponding tool associated with it. And then I would need to add it to my content section using that add activity button. So I might add it to an exam, click on add activity, select quizzes, and then add my quiz here. Given the time, I'm just going to go quickly for the discussion form. In this case, I'm not showing you how to build a discussion form. It was really just to showcase that a discussion forms can have grades associated with them. So when you create a discussion form, you're pressing on new form, then creating a new topic. Once you have that topic created, you would click on the little downward arrow, click on edit topic, and then you click on the assessment tab. When you click on the assessment tab, you can associate it to a grade item. So let's say mini biography in this case. You would copy the amount of points that you put in the grade center. So I believe it was 10 in my case. There you go, I put 10 for everything, so it's easy to remember. And then by default, if this is all you do, you'll be able to associate 1 grade for all the posts that the student has contributed to a particular topic. If you want to go more granular than that, you can also select this option and allow assessment of individual posts. So for example, within a particular topic, if a student commented 50 times, this would allow you to grade all 50 posts. Or else, if you deselect this, you can just grade all 50 as 1 whole grade. The advantage of doing that too is that you can then choose to average the post score, sum all of them together, choose the maximum or minimum. So there's a few interesting features there for you if you're using discussion forms. So a bit quick, just because we're running low on time here and I wanted to give some time for questions. But now I'll open it up to you and I'll stick around a bit longer to answer those questions that you might have.